I mean, I think you paint a good picture of the basic state of affairs of the concentration of massive concentration of privately owned media, whether it's television, which is very important in some places, print media, various different media. I mean, one of the ironies of the critique of Roy Carroll that I do is this fixation on supposed state control in Venezuela, where you had a massive concentration of private channels, and this is repeated throughout. I think one of the ways of understanding the importance of the media and maybe the intensified importance of the media over the last period has been in part the weakness of the party organizations of the right after the neoliberal crisis. And in effect, the media often played the role of an oppositional right-wing party in the absence of an oppositional right-wing party, or at least a coherent oppositional right-wing party. So notoriously, and thankfully, the Venezuelan right has been massively incompetent up until the present. And even in the current moment, Maduro, despite governing in a very, very serious crisis, has something like 22% support, which is extraordinary given the levels of inflation and so on. And only 1% more for the opposition in this, with the rest deciding for neither option. So there are limits to media control as well. I don't think it's all consuming, but the opposition to it, or the alternative to it, in Venezuela and Ecuador, which was the most advanced, in my view, was the wrong alternative. Their alternative was explicitly state-owned media with very little, and regional media through Telesur. Well, in lieu of, say, state-financed, community-oriented, and community-controlled independent networks, which is what was being called for from the bases in both of these places. Because what you have in the now established state media, or the regional media in Telesur, is effectively an apologia for every move that Maduro makes, that every move that Correa makes, even when they make moves that are obviously and categorically wrong. And that is not a media that is an effective alternative to the private concentration of media. So it's very clear that there needs to be some kind of appropriation of these major media outcomes, but I think it's equally clear that a state monopoly on the alternative is a very false move, a wrong move. In response to Fred's question at the end, or comment and so on, mass mobilization and government alternatives and so on. I mean, I think what's clear is that there needs to be, even in the most potentially radical situation, a fierce protection of the independence of popular organizations, even when they're supporting a government, which is one of the crucial problems. I mean, it's easy to say this, obviously, and than to achieve this, but nonetheless, one of the real issues in Bolivia was the incorporation fully into the party and into the apparatuses of the state. And then when it was necessary for them to act independently and to pressure the government, they were totally unable to do so. This happened with all of the key social movement leaderships, all of the key trade union leaderships, and so on. So the Bolivian Workers' Central didn't hold an election for the first 5 years of the, which was an extraordinary thing, and because the Masistas won the leadership, and then they didn't hold elections regularly throughout. The peasant movements, when they couldn't win elections, they split the main organizations, and the state financed massively the officialist organization, and then ostracized or repressed the independent one. So I agree, you can't ignore electoral cycles, governmental questions of office, and so on. But there needs to be a recognition that if you become subsumed in these relationships, you will just be absorbed by the government and the disciplining power of capital on the reproduction of the state that you are occupying but not controlling. So I guess, in short, I mean, I don't mean to just as a slogan, but I don't have much time. So it's conceivable, and probably, to the extent that we can foresee these things in any kind of challenge that might lead to some kind of post-capitalist situation in the present in Latin America, it's very difficult to imagine that this wouldn't proceed in the first instance through elections, at least in the current context. But it's also equally clear that if it didn't quickly move beyond the constraints of liberal democratic institutions, it would be overturned by the right, which, I forgot to answer your question on class hatred, it takes something very short of a radical move to mobilize the right in extra-institutional ways. Manuel Zelaya in Honduras was an extremely modest left populist who had been a member of one of the two traditional ruling class parties of the country, and in fact is a major landowner himself. But when he did modest measures, they mobilized everything they could to set him down. So if you come to power through liberal democratic institutions, and the objective is to move beyond capitalism, you ought to be prepared to struggle outside of those democratic institutions if this is going to last even a short period of time. So, I mean, that's not a recipe, but I mean, those things need to be, I think, kept in mind in the current period just as before.
Questions?